Hey everybody, I'm recording this video after our sermon today on Sunday, going through chapter 11 in Paul's letter to the church in Rome. And this, as I said this morning in our service, if you were able to be there, this is a section of the letter, 9, 10, and 11. Chapters 9, 10, and 11 is a section in this letter where Paul begins to agonize and begins to wrestle with, lament over his Jewish brothers and sisters and their seemingly inability to bow their knee to Jesus Christ and hearing the gospel of the good news. Paul, in the beginning of the letter, says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, and that within the gospel contains the power of salvation, the very righteousness of God, and that what is alarming to him is that the Jewish people, the Israel nation, was a nation that was chosen by God, his chosen people, and surely they should be able to receive this news of Jesus Christ and accept it and be saved because they are part of the chosen family. And what he is witnessing, obviously, is that is not the case, and is coming to the realization that not all Israel apparently is Israel. Just because you have the sign of circumcision doesn't necessarily mean that you are counted in as part of the family, and that's evident through their hardening of heart and their disbelief. And so here in chapter 11, Paul begins to really kind of look at that and comes to the realization, and a great positive realization, that just because someone is hardened does not necessarily mean that they are lost forever. To think that way would be to diminish the power of God's grace and diminish the sovereignty of God. Of course, the Lord can save whom he wants to save. And we believe that the way that is done is through a professing faith in Jesus Christ, and that professing faith comes through the Holy Spirit first, initially working on our hearts for us to be able to recognize and understand that. And so here in chapter 11, he is looking at the Israel nation, and that there is hope, that there is a remnant, as he says, a small part of the Israel nation that is still faithful, even though they are looking like they are that they have a hardness of heart. The big question that I frequently get here in chapter 11 is Paul's statement in verse 26, I believe, where he says all Israel will be saved. And that seems to kind of run counter to everything that we've been talking about, because does that mean that Israel, as in Israelites, don't have to believe in Jesus, that one day the stumbling block, as Paul says, will be removed by God and that all Israel will be saved? Does that mean that is the case? And I would say that I don't think so. I think that if you take a view of that way and thinking that all Israel, every Israelite will be saved, begins to misunderstand this concept and probably misunderstand all the information leading up to this point. You've already heard me say not all Israel is Israel. You also have Paul talking about a remnant, a small part of the great nation has been set aside to be ones who would be saved. And I think what Paul says here in verse 26, he's not talking about every individual Israelite as much as he's talking about the nation as a whole, as in like all the world and all nations will come to know who Jesus is. That does not necessarily mean every single person. It most likely probably means every single person who is elect, who has been chosen by God to be able to receive those things, who will discontinue in their unbelief. And so that is one that is probably the main question that I hear with chapter 11, and that is something that I offer to you as a bit of conversation. But the big takeaway here in chapter 11 really and truly is that just because someone is unbelieving, and we know we have people in our lives that are like that, maybe close relatives, brothers, sisters that are unbelievers, does not necessarily mean that they are outside of God's gift of grace. And therefore, we should never stop living like people, living in which we have lives that people would be jealous about. As I said today, we should never stop loving on folks in Jesus' name, no matter who they are. And sometimes it's really hard for folks, because sometimes people know some really bad people and have experienced bad things in their family at the hands of bad people. And it becomes real hard to kind of love them in this way, or even to begin to think that God could actually save them by his gift of grace. But to think in a way that people are outside God's gift of grace diminishes his power and diminishes the gift of what grace is. And so as you go through chapter 11, and really I would encourage you to review 9 and 10 as well, just kind of this whole little section here right in the heart of the letter. And what's going to happen is in chapter 12 we'll change the tone again, and we'll switch to a different type of drive as he begins to talk about ministry and how this plays out in our lives. But chapters 1 through 8 really are the gospel, and you can include 9, 10, and 11 as he begins to see how does this gospel pertain to what God has already promised to the Israelite nation. So I hope you have a wonderful time going through this. Just as a heads up, I may not be able to get videos to you for chapters 12 or 13, as I will be out of town for the next 2 weeks. I am going to try, but if not, I encourage you to follow the outlines, to go through those questions, and everything will be great. Have a great time, everybody. Have a great rest of the next few weeks, and God's grace, how amazing is it?